Should be. All right. So we are going to be covering tonight, certainly welcome to everyone. We're going to be finishing up Acts chapter 22 and moving in, maybe even completing Acts 23 as well. So this will be a lot of going through some of Paul's speech and then some of the aftermath of Paul's speech. That'll be what our topic is tonight. And so why don't we start with prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have made us in your image and you have given us an ability to find humor and have joy and laughter. What a delight to know that these things are not just part of the created order, but reflect you and your presence with us. We ask that as we study your word this evening, you would again bestow upon us the wisdom of your Holy Spirit, that we might better understand these words and learn from the examples of your church. We ask this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, so just a quick recap here, because we are going to be picking up right in the middle of Paul's speech. Paul went back to Jerusalem because he had a vision from the Lord that it was time to go back so that he could be taken to preach in front of governors and kings. So he went back to Jerusalem. He talked with Jesus' half-brother James at council there. James basically said, doing everything that we've asked, this is what we've said, yay and amen. We want to try and get the people back on your side. So why don't you go to the temple, take these guys with you, pay for them to go through the purity rites, and you go through them too. And Paul said, that sounds great. Let's do this, right? Sometimes ritual, even if we know it doesn't have a salvific effect, does have a benefit to our morality, to our spiritual life, to just that kind of the endeavor of life. And so Paul goes through, it's a 7-day treatment, we'll call it, right? It's 7 days of purification. And he's gone through 6, and he goes to the temple, and on that day at the Jews erupt. Jews had come down from Asia. They see Paul. They assume that he's taken Greeks into the temple, and he is just, destroying the tradition of the ancients, and they raise holy hell, quite literally. They have to close the temple gates because they've dragged Paul out, and they're afraid that they're going to drag him back into the temple and murder him in the Temple Mount. And the whole city is in such an uproar that the governor himself sends the commander of this of Jerusalem down with troops to get to the bottom of this. And so Paul is first arrested and then transferred by soldier into the keep, and talks briefly with the commander and is given a chance to speak to the Jews. We left off in the middle of his speech where he is laying out for those who have gathered around demanding his death what he was and what he is. And that is a Jew of Jews, one who is well versed in the law, brought up in it, sees great benefit to the faith, and not one who has left it, but has seen its fulfillment in Christ. So we were just at verse 15 is where we left off. And this is right after Paul has told them of Jesus' appearance to him on the road to Damascus, his baptism by Ananias. And so verse 15 is again Ananias speaking to Paul, and it starts in this way. For you will be a witness for him, that's Jesus, to everyone of what you have seen and heard. And now, why do you wait? Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name. And when I had returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw him saying to me, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that in one synagogue after another I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed, I myself was standing by and approving and watching over the garments of those who killed him. And then he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Now this is where the speech ends, not because Paul wants it, but because of the crowd. But let's just unpack this a little bit. This kind of, what we have here is a chance for us to just revisit the very beginning of the ministry that Paul had, that we went through in chapters 8, 9, 10, 11 in that section. So after Paul goes from Damascus, he goes back to Jerusalem, right? And then from Jerusalem, we read that Luke says that the council sent him north, if you remember that, right? The council said, you need to get out of here. Interesting here, Paul gives us another reason. It wasn't just the church, but it was the church listening to Paul, who had a trance, had a dream. Jeff, you've got the NIV. In verse 17, I didn't look this up. Does it say Paul fell into a trance?
Yep, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking.
Okay. So this is an interesting word, right? It's ektase, is what it is. Ek just means out of, but tasso can mean well, it can mean you can like shake, almost like shake, rattle, and roll a little bit. It's a word that's used for like ecstasy, or astonishment, bewilderment. The idea of almost an out-of-body experience that you sometimes hear about in some religions or after some kind of contexts. So that's what Paul's having. Paul gets caught up. The one thing I didn't check is whether or not it's that same word, but I would guess it is. I'm not going to check it right now. That's the same word that Isaiah would have used in the Greek in Isaiah 6, when Isaiah is in the temple and he had a vision of God being present in the temple. So very similar, that Paul here kind of having again prophetic dreams and inspirations by the Lord. So Paul gives us a little more insight into why the church decided it would be a good idea for Paul to leave. When we saw it from Luke, it was simply because Paul stirred up a hornet's nest everywhere he went. And the church said, you should go north, young man. And here Paul tells us that it wasn't just the church's idea, it was Jesus' idea that he should go north and go to the Gentiles. So why do you think we would have, and this is the whole point of my kind of rambling here, is to ask the question, why would Paul tell this story differently? Or why is this story told here differently than when Luke told it earlier? Go ahead, Linda.
Well, I just want to say, this is an interjection. The current Lutheran Witness talks about this, about different perspectives and contradictory in scripture.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's more of the first person, Luke is like, this is what happened to these people, and Paul is saying, this is what happened to me. Okay. And then you're going to get different stories, like you say, I mean, if I tell the exact story of what happened to me, it's going to be different than if you tell the story of what you saw happen to me. Do you know?
Mm-hmm.
So.
And the audience is going to be different too.
Right.
And I think that's really the key here. Right. So when we're going through the middle of the book of Acts, when Paul is introduced and when Paul is sent out on his missionary journeys, okay, there's a connotation that we receive when the church says, Paul, you're kind of making some trouble, but you're really on fire for this Jesus guy. We love that. We think it's a great thing. We're going to just send you up here, okay, where you can't really bother us right now, but you can still talk about Jesus. That'll be a good thing. And we look at that and we go, yeah, church was wise. This was good, right? And we look at the church in Jerusalem from that point all the way till now as really being a pretty wise institution. Right? We see it in the way they handle the issues of Gentile cleanliness that Peter struggles with. And so we kind of see the church in a positive manner. What Paul does in this statement is he ignores the church, because these Jews don't care anything about church authority. They don't care anything about the elders. What he wants to do is he wants to cement the authority of Jesus as something that it the authority of Jesus in the same way that the Old Testament prophets kind of submit or cement the authority of the Lord. So when Paul says, I had a vision in the temple and it was of Jesus, he is, and I said he's making this like just about the same vision as Isaiah. He is very clearly saying Jesus is the Lord and that these things are equal. So that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to raise up the testimony of Jesus, not talk about the inside baseball of how church ministry goes, which is what Luke is kind of doing. Linda's camera definitely just like hiccuped for a minute. She was there and now she's gone. She's raptured. But in the rapture, she's gone. We've been left behind. Everybody know the Lee Greenwood song. Sorry.
Pastor,
Yes.
so is Paul also trying to get them to understand that Jesus and God are one and the same?
Yes, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. So in Isaiah 6, Isaiah only sees the feet of God,
Right.
underneath the robe. So he doesn't even see the feet, but he knows they're there, and it fills the temple. And so nobody gets a vision of anything but the Lord in the Lord's temple, right? Because that would be kind of really weird to have some other God show up in your temple. So that's what Paul's trying to do here, is he's trying to establish that already early on, this voice that had called him is the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. It is now God taken on flesh in Christ. And so he makes that comparison and that connection for them. So absolutely. It's a little bit kind of in the weeds, but it's definitely what he's trying to do there. And it's why he doesn't talk about church politics, because they don't care and they don't need to know. They need to know that Jesus is the Lord and that Jesus was looking out for him, even as he had been a good Jew, even murdering Christians. All right, good. Anything else on this little end of speech? All right, we go on to 22 here. Up to this word, that's the Jewish crowd, listened to him. Then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. I love that they make them British in this translation just for a moment. I think the translators are being kind, and I think Luke was probably kind to what kind of words were being uttered by the Jews in this moment. But yeah, what do you think they're trying to say here?
Sounds like they're rejecting it.
He's
What was
not- Get rid of him.
Yeah, get rid of him, kill him. Absolutely. For Jesus, when the crowd came to Pilate, they yelled, crucify him, crucify him. This is equivalent to that. Get rid of him, murder him, not just, let him off with a warning, but get rid of him. And so 23, and as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and throwing dust into the air, man, they are having a temper tantrum of epic proportion here, right? The tribune, so that's the guy who is running all of the military for this region of the Roman Empire. The tribune ordered him, that's Paul, to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. Everybody know what flogging is?
It's not
It's not nice. No, it's not.
It's
Like-
the 39 lashes with the cat of nine tails, right?
Yes. You don't have to do all 39. But the limit was 39 because theoretically 40 would kill you from blood loss. That's why 39 is the number, because the Romans in their cruelty did some testing. All right, so this is whipping, and this was considered to be we'll say before there were black sites and waterboarding and the finding out of information via torture, this was the Romans' MO. They, if you were speaking the truth, then, you know, a little pain wouldn't change your mind. And if a little pain changed your mind, then perhaps your truth wasn't as truthful as we thought it was. This is why torture doesn't work at all for these kinds of things, but they did it anyway. But this is interesting. So 25, when they had stretched him out for the whips, so they would have bound his arms out on a device, kind of, you know, 2 pieces of wood, basically, to stretch him out wide. Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" Now, we hear this, and what is your reaction to such a innocuous question from Paul?
Very bold.
Okay, pretty bold. What else?
He doesn't really want to get flogged.
No, he doesn't really want to get flogged. That is absolutely true. He does not want to get flogged. So, all right.
Did he have this in his back pocket the whole time?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. There is a lot of guesses, Dan, as to why he waited till this moment to pull it out. But the thing that seems to be the most logical to me is that Paul had a very good understanding of Greek and Hebrew, and probably only a very limited vocabulary when it came to Latin. And so when he hears, right, that he's being taken inside, he may not have understood the language of the Romans that he was going to be flogged. And it wasn't until his arms were being pulled out wide and his, you know, robe being taken off that he got this idea that something bad is coming. Now, here's the thing, though. Paul's question is not so innocuous.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
So there's a couple of things we want to just lay out here. This is, by the way, the first time that Paul has been revealed to be a Roman citizen in the whole book. I know we just kind of assume that as knowledge. This is the first time Paul ever drops that little nugget on us. So the first time anybody's reading through the book of Acts, this is when they find out that Paul's a Roman. So it's a surprise to them as it is to the Romans and the Romans, which is kind of a nice narrative tool here. We kind of spoil it because we study Paul, but it's a nice narrative piece. This is the first time we find this out. Second, it is in the Roman Empire, it was legal to arrest a Roman citizen and to have him bound. But it was illegal to inflict on a citizen, quote, the disgrace of being led in public bonds, which kind of attests to the honor culture which Rome had. And then Cicero, in a collection of speeches he made in 70 BC, these were speeches that are, if you wanted to look them up, they're called In Verrem, Verrem. They're a collection of speeches that he made against the corruption and the extortion at the trial of Gaius Verus, Verres, who was the governor of Sicily. These speeches are what made Cicero made his first political victory and would pave the way for him to be the political leader he became. It's in those speeches, he says, to bind a Roman citizen is a crime, to flog him an abomination, to slay him is almost an act of murder. And those words would then be encapsulated into Roman law, so that if you were to flog a Roman citizen, the flogger would be executed.
Mhm.
So at this point, when Paul drops this knowledge, the centurion is going to run away and stop them from doing any of this, because everybody's going to point the finger at everybody else. And then all of them are going to be on the chopping block. Nobody's going to survive if they end up injuring a Roman citizen, particularly if he didn't do anything wrong. Now, equally, we want to say this, that to lie about one's citizenship had an equally painful punishment. It was punishable by death as well. So if you said I'm a Roman and you weren't really a Roman, you couldn't prove that you were a Roman, and they didn't care anymore. So Paul probably could have proven this claim with two different ways. First, he could have had a wooden diptych, which is just like a little book, okay, two pieces of wood tied together, that would have been inscribed or carved with a registration, his birth as a citizen. It's what's called a diploma civitatis Romanae. The penalty for having a false document was pretty severe. I bring that up because we're actually going to maybe see that instance a little later on in this same story. But these kinds of citizenships could be handed out. There's a story told about Emperor Nero, who handed out a bunch of tokens of this citizenship to a troupe of Greek dancers that he was just so infatuated with after he saw them dance, gave them all Roman citizenship. The other option, if you don't have a little triptych like a passport, would be a liberus, which is like a notary copy. So it's like, to find the real form, go to Tarsus City Council, box C. And those forms, we actually know that those kinds of things actually did exist. These notary forms basically said, stated the facts and then where to find the original document. And those were kept for ages. So you could prove, Paul would have to prove that he is a Roman citizen. So he does this when he figures out that bad things are coming. He does drop the bomb that he's a Roman citizen so that they can't hurt him, at least in that same way. So we get to 26 now. When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." And the tribune came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he, that's Paul, said, "Yes." And the tribune answered, "I bought this citizenship for a large sum." And Paul said, "But I am a citizen by birth." All right, we'll pause here for a moment. What do you guys think of that? Little interchange there.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out who said I bought this citizenship for a large sum.
That's the tribune. That's the guy who's the political leader.
Okay, all right.
So if you have enough money, you can buy what you want, including citizenship.
Yeah, if you can get people to look the other way. So
Right.
fun fact, it was illegal to buy a citizenship or sell citizenship in Rome. Even during it began to occur. You could buy it for a very large sum in very strange circumstances. It's under the Emperor Claudius, who is just coming down at this period, that there's an influx of cheap, illegal citizenships being sold. So we don't know if this tribune has bought his citizenship and is a citizen kind of illegally, kind of scooted across the border, bought the right paperwork and just, paid his taxes after that, or not. We don't really know if he's trying to trip up Paul or if he is kind of legitimately saying, "I bought this for a lot of money." Most scholars, and I tend to agree, think that this tribune probably was a naturalized citizen, and he's lying here, trying to see if Paul will admit that he has purchased this illegally. He's not really a citizen. Others have said, he's trying to, he's sure that Paul, who's a Jew, maybe he's a citizen, but maybe he bought it in the same way he did. So the tribune would still be the higher authority, which would mean that he could tell Paul, "Well, if you don't tell, I won't tell, and we're just going to ignore this whole flogging thing," right? In either case, Paul is legit and Paul has the moral high ground. Okay, it's like the end of Star Wars 3, I have the high ground. Don't try it. Okay, Paul's got it.
So would Paul have some proof of it?
We would guess that one of two things. there, Gordon. Either Paul has like a little passport, probably made out of wood, either on his person, or he's able to, tell them, go to this house and it's there in my things. Or he has a document that would have been like a notary, like a notary copy of something. Again, would have been with his things. He would have told the centurions where to go to pick up this paper that would have said, Paul, citizen of Tarsus, permanent file available in Tarsus City Hall. So he would have had that. He would have kept that, not necessarily on his person that day, because he was just going to the temple. He wasn't expecting to be traveling, to places of this import on that day. But he definitely could have and would have been able to support his claim. Yeah. Otherwise, they just would have executed him. Because if you can't support your claim, then they'll just ignore you and kill you. Because people with power don't have time for that.
Is it possible that the commander could have been challenging whether Paul was able to afford a citizenship?
Absolutely. Yeah. That is another option that's given, Dan, is that the Tribune, is speaking truth that he bought his for a large sum, and looking at Paul, knowing the kind of financial status of the Jews, said, there's no way you were able to do this. And so, that is an option, another option for kind of understanding the Tribune. In all of it, it certainly seems like the Tribune was hoping that he could outrank Paul, because if he could socially outrank Paul, whether it be that he bought the citizenship for a larger money and therefore was higher up in the ranks, or that Paul really didn't have a citizenship, in either one of those cases, it might be that Paul could be persuaded to overlook this event. Because if Paul doesn't, it's going to look bad. One of my favorite lines from the musical Man of La Mancha is spoken by Sancho, who's speaking of his wife, but let's just ignore that for right now. He says, whether the stone hits the pitcher or the pitcher hits the stone, it's going to be bad for the pitcher. And that's definitely the Tribune here. Clay pitcher, not going to work out well from the stone. That is Paul. All right, good. So onward to 29. So those who were about to examine him, that should be in quotes, examine him. They were about to flog him and ask some questions. But those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately. And the Tribune was also afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and he had bound him. And again, this means that the Tribune could have been subjected to severe punishment. But on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet, and he brought Paul down and set him before them. All right, so Paul gets to spend the night in the garrison, and then we move on to chapter 23, where we'll get to the next kind of speech. Anything else from this chapter?
So I can't think of what he would have said specifically, but I just think that maybe Paul was saying some things that the Romans wouldn't have been too excited about, and I'm surprised they didn't question him as to what he was talking about. And
so that's part of kind of the history here, is that the Tribune is not in the temple, and really certainly doesn't have a good ear for Hebrew, probably has a passing knowledge of Greek. And when we look at what Paul says in the Jerusalem area, it's about Jesus. It's about, the interplay between old Judaism and the way as the fulfillment of Judaism. He has not written anything about, don't listen to the authorities or anything of that ilk. In fact, he'll write just the opposite in his letter to the Roman church, right? That obey the government, right? Even though they may be, wicked, they have the sword of the Lord to do justice, and pray that you might live your life in quietness and peace. So he is absolutely not the revolutionary overthrow the government. Again, the main reason that he was arrested in the first place is they thought he was an Egyptian who had come to raise Cain. And once they figure that out, that he's not that, then they have to figure out what to do because they put their foot in it rather mightily. All right. Anything else in that chapter? Cool beans. Then we move on. This will be chapter 23. And so this is the next morning. The council, this is the Sanhedrin. This is the same council, though probably different members, that condemned Jesus to death. On this council, you will have both Pharisaic interests, so people who are Pharisees, and you will have Sadducees. The Sadducees are primarily the power players in Jerusalem, but they are not the only members of the Sanhedrin. The major difference, just to remind us, the major difference, Sadducees do not believe in the spiritual world. They take the first 5 books, and that's it from the Old Testament that Moses wrote. They don't accept anything else as scripture, and they don't believe in angels, demons. We assume they believe in God, but nothing beyond that. So they would fit right in with your basic contemporary American. The Pharisees, however, were far more like us. Let's keep the law. Let's do what God commands. Now, we'll give them, certainly, we'll point out in the Gospels, they push things too far. They, want to find their own righteousness through the law, not through Christ. But, if we have to pick to be on one side or the other, we would much rather be on the Pharisaic side. So the Pharisees believe in a resurrection. They believe in angels. They believe in demons. These things will all become important. So Paul, looking intently at the council, Paul said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." So this now begins Paul's second defense speech. And the high priest, Ananias, commanded those who stood by him to strike him, that's Paul, on the mouth. Ananias, while he has a similar name to the chief priest during the day of Jesus, this priest was appointed by Herod Agrippa. That would be the guy who died from worms after he was speaking. If you remember, we talked about that. He had the silver dress on and all of that. This was earlier in the book of Acts. But Ananias is, Ananias here is appointed in 47 AD, and he'll serve for about 11 or 12 years as high priest. He's not a righteous guy at all. He was known to take bribes and such, and actually met his end because he was murdered by Jewish zealots. So Paul begins to speak. The high priest commands those who are next to him to punch him in the mouth, and they do. And then verse 3, Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck?" Ooh, I love it. You got to love a good insult, There is so much more to the vocabulary of language than 4-letter words. So it's good to see here. Jesus uses an insult very similar to this when he talks to the Pharisees. He calls them a whitewashed tomb, right? They're a place of death that's been made to look clean. A whitewashed wall, you got to remember, these cities don't have indoor plumbing, and so they are covered in certain things, and you're just painting over it. So, certainly not a charitable image to be talking about the high priest. And this is what is then said, verse 4. Those who stood by said, "You would revile God's high priest?" Well, yeah, he just punched me in the face. I mean, this is a pretty normal response, although Jesus did say, "Turn the other cheek." And Paul said, "I didn't know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." Now, this is a really interesting point. Paul's on trial for his life here. They're obviously not listening. They've just punched him, right? They physically assaulted him. They want nothing to do with listening to him. And yet, Paul could be angry. I mean, he lashes out with his tongue, which is not good. Paul should not have lashed out. Right? That was a sin. But Paul's response here is pretty amazing, right? It's a nice little lesson for us, I think, that honor is still in play. Right? Even when we don't like those who are in authority, the fourth commandment still is there. All right, to honor our father and mother, not just in our family, but the fathers of our faith, the fathers of the nation, those who the Lord has put up in authority over us. We are still to honor them, to pray for them, to care for them, not to revile them. So I know it's a hard thing, but nevertheless, as God's people, we live a different way. Let's stand out from the world. They can call insults and whatnot. Let us speak in a kinder way. That's my lesson for the day. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. All right, back to the text here. Go ahead, Linda.
Would he really not know that he was the high priest?
Yeah, he probably didn't. So Paul, I'm going to get my dates wrong. Paul would have been, we were looking at the dates, and I believe Paul went on his first missionary journey somewhere around 45. All right, maybe 46, because then Agrippa goes north and then Agrippa dies and all of that stuff. So it's very, very possible that Paul had this, well, you may remember that Paul has some missing time.
Okay.
We have about 14 years of Paul where we just don't know where he went, right? Because he goes to Damascus, and then there's like a gap. He goes down to Caesarea for a little bit, we think, he says. But then it's like 14 years later when he's sent north again. So it could very well be, Paul talks about it in one of his letters, and I forget the letter offhand, but he talks about being in Arabia for 14 years under the tutelage of the Lord. We think that happens in this same beginning time frame after the Damascus event, that God kind of teaches him in much the same way that the apostles were taught, kind of walking with him. So very, very possible that Paul has been out of the Jerusalem context for this entire period, that he has been the chief priest.
Okay, so it would be like leaving the United States and coming back and not knowing who the president was.
Less president, more leaving and not knowing who, the Department of Agriculture, who was heading the Department of Agriculture.
Okay,
So,
okay,
yeah, I mean, Paul's going to know, or at least be informed, like, who's ruling this thing? Who's, is it Herod? Is it one of Herod's kids? But he's not really interested in the Jewish hierarchy anymore. He's been doing his own thing for years as a missionary for the way. And he's only been back for like 7 days doing his thing.
Okay.
And then they tried to kill him, So,
okay, I was
Yeah.
trying to put that together.
yeah,
So.
no, good. Yeah, so he's
So
kind of out there. Go ahead.
The chief priest then didn't have any kind of distinguishing robe or anything like that then, huh?
Probably not when
not.
he came. So they're on Gentiles' land at this point. They've come to the tribune's house. This is not, they didn't walk Paul back into the temple. If they'd done that, then he probably would have been wearing some of his finery. But I don't think he's wearing anything really distinctive, anything more than maybe the other Jewish men gathered there to show their adherence to the law would have been wearing. Good question. All right. So 6. So it's after this. So after he gets punched and he kind of repents for a minute, verse 6. Now, when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, you can probably do this by sight, but also kind of by who's talking about what during, we assume there's a little more of a discussion going on than just the little bit that got Paul knocked in the teeth. But when one part were Sadducees, the other Pharisees, and we just went over some of the distinction. He cried out in the council, brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. If we have not thought that Paul is incredibly rhetorically intelligent, this shows it. All right. Paul sees this and he seizes on the moment. Now, that being said, he's also speaking truth. So that really does help. Okay, that he speaks, all of this is true, but he is seizing on a moment and a disagreement in order to kind of help out his case. Verse 7. Oh, sorry, Linda, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking, so he gets out of being punished by the Romans by saying he's a Roman citizen. He's trying to get out of being punished by the Pharisees by saying he's a Pharisee.
Yep.
So,
Yep, it's a good parallel.
yeah. They're like, no, I'm one of you. No, I'm one of you.
Exactly.
You know why God chose him.
Yeah, no, it really does. You're absolutely right, Trina. And this is why God chose him, because he is so unique in terms of what the early church had. The early church didn't have a lot to draw from. And here you have somebody who's got Roman citizenship, who's been trained up in the faith, who's a Pharisee of Pharisees. I mean, this is like, a 1 in a million kind of draft pick. All right, so verse 7. When he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. You can just see this as Monty Python. Suddenly, they're at each other's throats. They're yelling. It's theology just off the walls. All right. For verse 8, for the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So, when it says spirit here, it means soul. So the Sadducees are basically will say there's a God and there's what is created that's physical, nothing else. And then verse 9, a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisee party stood up and contended sharply. We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? Man, the tables have turned. They were probably in the crowd the day before calling out, kill the dude. And now they're like, let's just hold on a minute. Nothing's wrong with him. And maybe, just maybe, he's telling the truth because an angel showed up. If you're the Tribune, what do you think is happening right now? What's going on in your head?
Utter confusion of who is this man?
Okay, utter confusion to who Paul is. Absolutely. What else?
He keeps changing the story.
He keeps
He
changing.
adapts it.
Yeah, and the other people keep changing, don't they?
Yeah.
These are
He's very
crazy.
convincible.
Well, and let's go back to the whole, well, you just said you were a Roman citizen. Now you're trying to tell me you're high up in the Jewish faith. I mean, are those two really, do they really go hand in hand much?
Not often.
Right. So they're probably trying to figure out if he's lying in one respect or the other.
Yeah. But you have to just kind of sit back and I just imagine this Tribune going, what on earth did I step into? Because this is bad, right? Because, when there's theological division, we tend to get loud. We tend to get, angry and things, even about little things. It just happens, right? When there's a division in the church about theology, it's never an easy thing. It's always a big deal. But here they are, they're having a little convocation, and Paul in an instant just turns one on another, and you can just see it. And it starts with kind of bickering and yelling and, what if, right? We see nothing wrong with him, really cementing one side. And then verse 10, the dissension became violent. And the Tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks.
Again.
So now the council is actually fighting with itself. The Sanhedrin is come to fisticuffs. This is worse than the US Senate before, okay, during the days of Henry Clay in the early 19th century, when men were being beaten with canes and shot on the Senate floor. This is worse than that. These guys are coming to fisticuffs. All of them. It's, you just imagine, it's just like an old cartoon. They're just rolling around in big circles and there's just fists and, you know, bam and blam coming out everywhere. It's yesterday, only on a smaller scale for the Tribune. And he's afraid that Paul is going to be destroyed in the midst of it. And he's got to take care of the Roman citizen, because that would look really bad to have let this, you know, get out. And then Paul ends up murdered after all of this by the Jews. So he pulls him inside. So yeah, certainly we have a little bit of divide and conquer here going on, but you know, we also have, you know, we get to see just how fractured the Jewish faith really is. Right? And especially how fractured it is when they do not have an anchor point that is drawing them to something, right? They don't have an anchor that's drawing them home. Their hope of a Messiah is not drawing them together, but rather their denial of a Messiah, again, creating more division and drawing them apart. All right, good. Anything else about this fight? All
Well,
right.
would it also have been illegal if the Jews would have killed him? Is this still in the time where the Jews are not allowed to?
Oh, yeah.
mete
Oh,
out
yeah.
corporal
Yeah.
punishment? So that would have been a second thing against the Tribune guy. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
This Tribune is just pulling his hair out because he's trying to just be like, this is a misunderstanding. Let's just all calm down. And everywhere this guy goes, everything just breaks. Everything goes wrong. If it could, it did. So the Tribune is not happy at all with what's going on. So verse
At this point,
11.
I'd be surrendering. I'd be like, I'm out.
Well, don't skip ahead. He's about to do that, but in his own way. In his
Sorry.
own- So verse 11 here. The following night, so Paul then taken back into the barracks, spends the night, spends a day, spends another night as the Tribune tries to figure out what on earth to do. So he's just going to cool Paul's heels, keep the Jews away from him. So the following night, the Lord stood by him. So here we have an appearance of Christ, just like he had in Damascus, except now he's not going to go blind. And he said, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. Now Paul knows he's got a safe passage on to Rome because Jesus said he's going there. That verse alone, I am sure, brought Paul no end of comfort in all of the shipwrecks and other issues that he is going to endure in the years to come. But he knows he's got to get to Rome because Jesus said so. So verse 12, when it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath to neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. It seems they settled their Sadducee Pharisee dilemma, deciding that mutual destruction is not the answer. So let's just murder Paul and call it even. This is often how evil works, by the way. We let evil often comes together in doing other evil. Two wrongs don't make a right, but they often make evil friendships. This happened a few times in the scriptures. Let's kind of move a little bit here. So they can either eat nor drink. So they got 3 days. That's their time limit. Because you can only survive about 3 days without water. I mean, if you're really, really trained and you're like training for it, you can probably survive a little bit longer without water. But these are just regular guys who are making a promise, hoping they can cash in on it before the end. And there were more than 40, verse 13, there were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. And 14, they went to the chief priests and the elders and said, we have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food. Well, they don't say water here, but that's okay. No food till we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the Tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. and we are ready to kill him before he comes near. So that's the whole plan. All right. They're going to go to the Tribune and say, we want a second crack at Paul. We promise we won't punch him and we won't punch each other this time. All right. We'll actually listen to him. That's their whole argument. So it's just a theological issue. You don't have to get involved. Just bring him to us. We'll handle it. I promise. Don't pay attention to my fingers being crossed. Okay. Just do it. We'll be fine. I'm meaning it to sound as silly as it is because it really does. All right. And really does sound silly to our eyes and to our ears. However, the Tribune is not a theologically astute individual. In fact, most people aren't very theologically astute. And so that's one of the reasons that the church has to be so careful in how we message and how we talk about things, is because people are not as discerning. Either they don't have ability, or they don't have a desire, or they don't have a willingness. In any of these cases, really the church has to be careful in its own messaging, has to not bring confusion to what's going on. But in this case, that's the plot. And now we see God's hand. So in all of these things, as I said, Paul gets some comfort that he sees Jesus, and Jesus says, you'll go to Rome. Oftentimes in the midst of issues of life, struggles, pandemics, you name it, it can be hard to see God's hand at work. But this is one of the places where I think it's pretty simple. Verse 16. Now the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush. So he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul's nephew seemingly is following Uncle Paul's footsteps and got a good education as a Pharisee. So much so that he's in the council space when they make this plot. And what does he do? He runs all the way down to the center of the city, to where the Tribune is, and he goes and talks with Paul to let him know that they're going to try and murder him. Now, if that's not God's hand, I don't know what is. And this is then what happens. So Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the Tribune, for he has something to tell him. Oh, that nephew must have been scared stiff at that point. 18. And so he took him, that's the centurion, took Paul's nephew and brought him to the Tribune and said, Paul, the prisoner, called me and asked me to bring you this young man to you, as he has something to say to you. And the Tribune took him by the hand, which would tell us that he's probably a young man. He's probably 12 or 13. So this is an incredibly brave young man to do this. And going aside, he asked him privately, what do you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire something more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves with an oath, and either to eat or drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent. And so the Tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, tell no one that you have informed me of these things. And we'll just kind of pause there for a minute. Again, just God's hand here to save Paul. Again, the Tribune seemed like he might have gone along with this. A theological debate. What does the government know about theology? Nothing. And so it's important not to trust the government to make theological decisions. That's my second TED Talk for today. But now we want to get into the Tribune saying, I'm out, as Linda was suggesting here. So knowing that this plot is going on, verse 23 here, he then called two of the centurions and said, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the third hour of the night. So that's 9 or 9:30 or so. So we're going to have 470 soldiers marching with Paul to Caesarea from Jerusalem. That would be about 25 miles by night or so. It's not 25 miles. It's we'll see in a minute. It actually go about 35 miles during this middle of the night. So 24. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. See, Tribune's like, I'm out. This is too much. I'm done. Send him on to the bigger fish. And he wrote a letter to this effect: Claudius Laius, to his excellency, the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. Oh, what a good guy. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against this man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. This is an interesting little letter. How on earth did Luke get a hold of this official letter?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, this is not an easy thing to get a hold of. We would think that if we have this historic letter, and certainly we don't think that Luke is making it up. All right, Luke's not just making up the story. Our best guess is that this letter was read aloud, both in its writing and in its reception. We tend to read things first and foremost in our inner voices, right? We are taught very early on to silently read. This phenomena of silent reading is not attested to widely until we have gotten well into and often past the Middle Ages. The church father Augustine, who lives about 400 AD or so, is absolutely flabbergasted that the Bishop Ambrose is able to sit in his office and read quietly without making a noise. He doesn't understand how it works.
What?
Augustine reads aloud, as do most people. So there was no silent reading typically in Jesus' day. It was all done aloud. So our best guess as to how we have this official letter is that Paul was there and that Paul remembered it and told it to Luke. So just kind of a nice little piece here of kind of seeing how a Roman letter would be written, seeing a little bit of how the sausage is made in the ancient Roman government, seeing how the Tribune paints himself in a wondrous light.
Pastor, when you're talking about reading aloud,
Yeah.
we were talking recently about getting emails and letters, and some people can't read them on the screen. They have to print them out. It's kind of a similar thing. A lot of people can't understand why you would have to have it in print. It works.
You're absolutely right, Dan. Absolutely right in that phenomena. I don't like to read on screens if it's anything of substance. It seems like you don't either with your backdrop.
You print my emails to you, Pastor?
I said substance, Dan.
Oh,
Upset.
somebody's on his game tonight.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I'll pay you 5 cents later. I'll read emails and that sort of thing. But yeah, if I'm doing any kind of like heavy research into stuff, even if I get a PDF, I'll still print the PDF and work my way through it. Which is it's mutandis to what we're talking about. All right, we're going to finish this up here. Verse 31. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris, which is 35 miles away. So from 9:30 till let's call it 6 a.m., 9 hours or so, they go 35 miles. seems really far-fetched, but we're going to trust that, you know, people know how far different places are away and that they actually did this. So they go through 35 miles. The next day, they return to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with them. So 400 men go back to the city. The 70 horsemen continue on all the way to where Felix was. He was in Caesarea. That's another 25 miles. So that's 60 miles from Jerusalem to Caesarea, roughly. And when they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. And on reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. And when he learned that he was from Sicilia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. And that's how this chapter ends. So historically, Paul will now spend the next 2 years in this protected prison. And this would be the period of time that we believe that Luke then will do his investigation that results in his first book to Theodotus, which is the Gospel of Luke. So it's at this period that Luke is going to do his research and write the gospel. One other point here, just for us, kind of in the background. I know you guys are loving all the little nuance of things here. Why do you think that the governor asks Paul what province he's from?
See how quickly he could answer and give a correct answer.
Okay.
If he had to think about it too long, then he's probably not really Roman.
Okay. Well, that would be one thing. I think the governor is going to take the Tribune's word that he actually checked out that basic idea. I would hope so anyway, but you're right. If he does question Paul and Paul is like, well, and he doesn't have an answer, then certainly he would know something else is going on. Any other thoughts?
Is it possible he could pass him off on somebody else?
Yeah.
This is a question that the historians, and I agree with them, have determined is how big a problem is Paul going to be? So if Paul has really stuck his foot in the hornet's nest, like it seems like he has, according to this letter he got, the governor wants to know whether or not this is big fish. Where are you from? I'm from Ephesus, third major city of the Roman Empire. I'm from Rome itself. I'm from Alexandria, right? If he's from some big place, we're going to send him on to the bigger fish. That'll be somebody else's problem then, right? Cecilia, you know, that's like Lansing. You know? Okay. Yeah, it's important, but we can deal with it here in Oakland County. Okay, not going to be the end of the world. No one's going to get really upset. So no change of venue needed. Yeah, that would be, I think, that's what the historians tend to say is the reason for this question, was to see just whether or not he could handle the situation, or if he needed to kick him up to bigger authorities. Part of the equation for that is that Paul's accusers have to come. Paul would have to remain in prison until his accusers came. So if he has to get sent to Rome, then his accusers would have to make it to Rome. And that might never happen. And no governor wants to be responsible for putting more pressure on Rome. Because unless you've done something really good, you don't really want your name uttered around Rome very often. All right, good. We got to finish that. Yay. Any thoughts on this chapter? I know we kind of rushed a little bit through it. Forgive me. Okay. Well, then I would say, you know, this is a good place for us to stop for tonight. We will be back next week and we'll deal with the next chapter. It should be a good experience, I think, because we actually get to move forward in time. So this has been 12 days over these last couple chapters. Now we're going to take a couple years to get there. So this should be good. Like we said, Paul stays in prison for 2 whole years. All right.
Next weekend is Labor Day weekend, and we're still having
Oh, yeah. What do you guys want to do? Meet, not meet? I'm open.
Gonna be back.
We may or may not be here.
Yeah, we're probably gonna be up north.
Let's pause
Let's
it.
do, let's say 3, 4. Okay. We won't meet next week.
it.